Okay. Well, class, thank you for joining us today at our first subject matter expert session, our live Zoom session. I really appreciate all that could make it, and I understand for the folks that couldn't. We have a unique setup with our class where we have literally folks all over the world that are geographically distributed. My hope is through these sessions to help introduce you to subject matter experts that are actively engaged in field using this technology in creative and innovative ways. This is an opportunity for you to get some exposure to that and also make this a two-way street. You'll be able to hear from them, but then you'll also be able to ask them some questions, especially as it may relate to what we've been examining this week or in coming weeks through maybe your research projects or the different activities. So I'm super excited to introduce our first guest, Christopher Todd. I just want to note, Chris and I work together on AUVSI's Florida Peninsula chapter. Chris is the incoming president, and super excited to see all the things that are shaping up or going to shape up under his leadership and guidance. So that being said, his bio, he's the founder and president of Airborne Response, a Miami-based provider of mission critical unmanned solutions for government and industry. AIRT utilizes UAS, commonly referred to as drones, to capture aerial imagery and data in the world's most challenging environments. Chris also serves as the executive director of AIRT, a Florida registered 501c3 nonprofit, non-governmental organization or NGO that provides unmanned aviation capabilities to help people prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters. Mr. Todd is a command staff member of the Florida Region 7 All Hazards Incident Management Team that's based out of the Palm Beach County Fire Rescue Department. And as a certified emergency manager or CEM, as well as an FAA-certified remote pilot, Chris excels at leading complex industrial, critical infrastructure, and disaster response flight operations. He has flown day and night UAS operations during hurricane response and recovery operations, structure collapses, aircraft accidents, and many other types of incidents. He's also the current director of the AUVSI Miami Chapter. I'd like to welcome Chris to the floor.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be here, and thanks for having me be a part of your program tonight. I am based in Miami Beach. That is a hotel behind me, so if you see any crazy stuff going on that I don't see, as I'm not really paying too much attention, wave your hands, because from time to time you don't know what's going to happen back there. But as Brent said, my background is kind of diverse. I haven't been in aviation all of my life. I actually came out of the marketing advertising side. I was a tech analyst living in New York City at the turn of the century, and really got into unmanned systems in about 2016 when I was working on a real estate project in Belize, and we were filming a video, and the videographer brought a Phantom 2 with him. And I was just kind of looking over his shoulder, like everyone likes to do, and looking at the screen, and said, wow, this is going to really reshape a lot of different industries and change specifically emergency management and public safety. And so that's kind of the area that I focused on. So I came back, I founded Airborne Response, and about a year later, we started the Airborne International Response Team, or AIRT, which is a 501c3. So what I'm going to do tonight is kind of talk to you a little bit about what we do both at Airborne Response and AIRT, and kind of go through the emergency management perspective of how we're looking at unmanned aircraft systems. And if you have questions and you want to stop me in the middle, that's fine. If you want to ask at the end, that's fine. We'll keep it really casual. Some of the content, subject matter in here is dumbed down a little bit because part of this presentation was meant for FEMA. So, I'm sure that many of you are well beyond some of the things we'll go into, but that's always good for a little bit of a refresher course, I think. So with that being said, let's dig into it and start the slideshow. Okay. So obviously, taming disaster with small unmanned aircraft systems. I'm going to give you an introduction to kind of who we are in the nonprofit side and how we operate. As Brent said, my background, I'm not going to go through all this. He did a great job covering it. But, I approached the sector through the lens of emergency management predominantly, also a little bit of marketing, a little bit of PIO. I bring that emergency management side to think about how we can conduct the operations to help, not just in the response phase of emergency management, but mitigation, preparedness, recovery. They're all really important phases. I mean, usually response is kind of what everyone's talking about, but unmanned aircraft systems are currently being used throughout all phases of emergency management. So let me get into the agenda. I'm going to, again, talk to you about AIRT, what we do. I want to talk a little bit about the value proposition of small UAS from an EM perspective, EM being emergency management. Some of the current limitations and pitfalls of drones. I think there's a lot of hype out there right now and everyone's excited about the technology. That's great, but it's not where it needs to be to really, maximize some of the things that we want to do. That being said, I'll talk about some of the benefits for EM, impacts on it, some of the big questions and keys that we tell folks who are looking to start a UAS program, whether it's in public safety or the emergency management side. And I'll give you a little bit of a summary of how we train remote pilots and coordinate assets with some key takeaways. So this is a slide from an annual exercise we do at Florida International University here in Miami. It's been called off the last 2 years because of COVID, but basically we bring out the USAR teams and public safety teams and start training them prior to hurricane season on how they can use UAS for different evolutions. And that was me conducting a briefing one morning. So I want you to imagine this. Imagine like a major earthquake strikes a US city. Lasts longer than a minute. There's mass devastation, fires burning for 3 days. Over 200,000 people are homeless. And that actually happened over 100 years ago in San Francisco, the great San Francisco earthquake. And there was a commercial photographer based in Chicago named George Lawrence. And he was known for balloon and kite photography. He developed a proprietary camera system called the captive airship, which he would hoist in the air with a team of people using either a kite system or hot air. And he did some work with the US Navy, actually the battleship Maine, which blew up in Havana Harbor. He was testing with that up in New England to kind of see how the Navy might be able to use aerial photography and different vantage points. And after the earthquake hit San Francisco, George Lawrence loaded up his team on a train and they made the venture out west to start shooting the disaster and the devastation in San Francisco. And so they got out there, they went to different vantage points around the city and they started shooting photos. And one photo in particular really garnered national and international attention. It was when this photo ran that people started really realizing how bad things were in San Francisco. And that's when the aid and the assistance really started flowing in. That picture is called San Francisco in Ruins. It's actually in the Library of Congress. But it was really the first known aerial photo of a major disaster that caught the public's attention. And so the point here is we think about UAS, we think about aerial photography, but specifically with small drones as being something that's new and a new capability. And it's really not. The capability has been there for well over 100 years. Now we're just kind of getting that capability into the hands of local and regional officials who can use it, who traditionally haven't been able to afford a manned aviation program. So we look at that photo of San Francisco in ruins, fast forward that to this shot, which was taken after Hurricane Michael in the Florida Panhandle. And you can kind of see a lot of different things happening in this photo. You can see damage to the roof structure. You can see damage to the homes in the lower right corner. You can see the trees that have been broken down. You can see resources staging on flatbed trucks, people standing in line for water and supplies. And so just from this little aerial imagery taken with the DJI drone, you can really start to grasp the story of how bad things are in this particular neighborhood. And this was Lynn Haven, Florida, just next to Panama City. So again, we're doing this with small drones for the most part. DJI, undisputedly the world leader, but that's starting to change, especially in public safety and disaster response, with new initiatives like the Blue UAS initiative, which is really forcing folks to think about, do we want to keep using Chinese technology? Do we want US and NATO friendly technology? And so that's kind of a key issue right now that's underway in the industry. So I mentioned that we had formed the Airborne International Response Team back in 2017 as a nonprofit. We're based in Miami Beach. We're a 501c3, which means we really run on donations, and those donations are tax deductible. We do have a GuideStar Platinum Seal of Transparency, and we're the official home to the Drone Responders program. And if you haven't heard of Drone Responders, you may want to visit droneresponders.org. But Drone Responders is the world's fastest growing program dedicated exclusively to supporting public safety use of unmanned aircraft systems. And we've got a resource center, got over 4,000 members from around the world. And we've actually launched a new project with Drone Responders where we're tracking the public safety programs around the world of the public safety agencies who are operating drones. And if you want to see that dashboard, I believe the URL is dashboard.droneresponders.org. And you can get a sense of where these programs are across the US and around the world. So the mission for AIRT is really to provide innovative unmanned aviation capabilities to help people prepare for, respond to, recover from expanding incidents, complex emergencies, and major disasters. We also research, analyze, and educate end users on the use of drones for good and support the adoption and use of UAS by public safety and emergency services organizations through the Drone Responders program. This was another image of after Hurricane Michael. This was the Panama City Flea Market. We had just finished a mapping mission. The light was actually really good. And I said, you know, Ty, hold up a second. Ty was the pilot you see in the photo. Said, let's just get a picture here with the flag in the background. And it turned into one of those semi-epic photos that really kind of tells the story of what we're all about, I think. So the vision statement of what we want to be is the world's leading nonprofit organization, uniting key stakeholders across government, industry, academia, non-government organizations, and individual volunteer contributors for the purpose of deploying drones for good. We want to spearhead innovative collaboration across vertical silos, break down international borders to forge truly exceptional partnerships. And we stimulate planning and training to improve preparedness, response, recovery capabilities from the smallest emergencies to the largest disasters. So that being said, again, I mentioned the FIU exercise. This is Ty, that same pilot you saw a couple of minutes ago, educating students at FIU's Academy for International Disaster Preparedness on disaster mapping with small UAS. And mapping is really one of the key use cases that we're seeing in public safety and emergency management. We can get satellite photos, you can get manned aviation doing large swaths of damage. But when you think about smaller localized areas where you need high resolution, such as the power grid, power transmission distribution lines, or even when a tornado goes through, the damage swath might be a half mile to a mile and a half wide. Drones are really perfect to go in there very quickly and start gathering aerial imagery and intelligence of the damage from a tornado. So the significant deployments for AIRT, Port of Miami exercise, we've done work in the Dominican Republic. I mentioned the FIU field exercises, Hurricane Irma, 8th Street pedestrian bridge collapse, Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Dorian over in the Bahamas. Since then, we've most recently we're at the Surfside building collapse, flying, doing some photogrammetry modeling of the incident site. And so we tend to kind of roll out at the request of different agencies and partners when they do need assistance from the air. And this was a port exercise at the at the Port of Miami, where we were conducting a weapon of mass destruction detonation, working with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, U.S. National Guard troops. And it was, I believe it was 2017, but the key takeaway from this exercise was we had all the chiefs from Miami-Dade Fire Rescue in the mobile command post, and they were really used to radio traffic and chatter. And we had some technical rescue crews deploying from the water, getting off a Coast Guard boat, climbing up a stack of containers, and basically conducting the evolution. The feedback we got from the chiefs was they had never heard the radio so quiet, because all that radio chatter going back and forth of the chiefs trying to do command and control with the field personnel was unnecessary, because the drone was showing exactly what was going on. And it was that was an aha moment for Miami-Dade Fire Rescue when they said, okay, these systems are going to change the way we operate with incidents like this. So we see a lot of that with the different partners we work with. It's just one or two little nuggets and the light bulb goes off and it's a whole different world. So what is the value of small drones, especially in public safety? And it's really this, it's public safety organizations with direct access to traditional manned aviation capabilities, less than 1%. It's the big agencies, LA counties, the New Yorks, the state agencies with bigger budgets. In rural areas, maybe they'll have a plane or a helicopter, but by and large, most small public safety agencies in the US just don't have access to manned aviation resources because they're expensive, they're complicated, there's limited use cases of what you can do with a helicopter and lack of ROI. You're not going to send a helicopter out typically to map a traffic accident. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So when we start looking at the FEMA model for different incidents, and there's a type 1 incident, which is a national state level incident, down to a type 5, which is a local village or township level incident, you start to kind of see that there's this air gap that existed. You had high altitude satellites, which you could use for the type 1 and type 2 incidents that really covered large areas. And you think like a Hurricane Katrina, right? You could send a satellite in and get imagery of a large area. And then you could use fixed wing specialized jets and airplanes to go in and maybe get a little bit better resolution, fly under the cloud cover. But again, you weren't bringing those in for city, county level incidents. And rotary and fixed wing helicopters were there too, but not really being used at the local village or township level for the most part. So that air gap existed. And that's the value proposition of what small unmanned aircraft systems bring. It's that new layer of low altitude unmanned capability using both rotary and fixed wing UAS that eliminates that air gap and is basically establishes itself as a resource that the largest incidents down to the smallest incidents can use. You can deploy it at a single car traffic accident. You can use it in a Hurricane Katrina type situation, not to fly the whole area, obviously, but to get really great high resolution imagery from specific targets of interest within the afflicted area. So that kind of shifted operational paradigms in 2017. We had Hurricane Harvey, which was a flood event in Texas, Hurricane Irma, which was a big wind event here in Florida, and Hurricane Maria, which was largely a wind event in Puerto Rico. And it basically, we hadn't seen like a triple major hurricane season like that in a while. And it was just the right point where unmanned aircraft systems started making a difference. And we started to see the use cases emerging from spotting victims to damage assessment, FEMA reimbursement. Even in Puerto Rico, they were using these systems to re-rig trail lines to pull transmission lines across rivers and gullies for power restoration. So it was kind of a benchmark year. Since then, we've seen it with wildfires, although, yep, there's a lot of concern about helicopters and planes doing water drops and drones flying in the area. But where we are seeing drones become very effective with wildfires are to go in after the fire has come through and the fire is now at a different point in the area. The jets and the helicopters are now fighting the fire downrange at that new point, and the drones are coming in behind to map the damage and figure out what happened and what was left and conduct that type of analysis. I mentioned tornadoes. Small UAS great for tornadoes because they're so portable. The storm chasers all have them, and the local crews are starting to get them where they can be deployed very quickly to do damage assessment. Floods, as we're seeing in Tennessee this past week, we've got drone teams there mapping the damage, looking for victims, conducting insurance work. So we're seeing a big uptick with floods for unmanned aircraft systems. General public safety, everything from barricaded suspects, active shooters, structure fires. The public safety agencies are now figuring out how to use these systems. And also for public information and news gathering. CNN has a news division called CNN Air, specifically using drones to capture imagery on the newscast. And now the public safety agencies with their public information officers, PIOs, are starting to realize the value of the imagery as well. And if you see an automotive commercial or you watch almost any type of movie, newscast, you start seeing drone imagery like you have never seen it before, almost where it's just becoming common. It always used to be that ground level imagery of the car driving around, and now we're getting these cool drone shots. So we're seeing that start to permeate public safety and emergency management as well. The light bulbs are going off. So the example missions for hurricane response, which is really what we deal with here in Florida, I mentioned public information. That's probably number one. How bad is bad? People don't believe it until they see it. So PIOs are using drones to support the communication strategies as far as why people who've evacuated cannot return to their home. And they want to know, is my home still there? Is my neighborhood still there? Is my town still there? Are my kids' schools still there? So drones can help tell that story very quickly and very effectively. Also to document the response for a variety of reasons and create a historical record and archive. Number two, search. I put and rescue, but drones are not picking people up like helicopters do, but they are very effective in search. You know, I mentioned flooding and those types of events where you can spot people on roofs or in areas where they need help, maybe trapped on top of their car. Rapid aerial damage assessment is a big one because now, as I mentioned, local emergency managers and public safety agencies have the capability to get aerial intelligence very rapidly after a hurricane goes through. They don't need to wait for FEMA or somebody else to send them imagery, Civil Air Patrol. They have that capability right now. FEMA and insurance claims sounds kind of boring, but it's actually really important because that's where the money is. And FEMA's had so many disasters over the last decade, they're becoming more and more strict about how they reimburse for those disasters. So agencies that have a condition assessment of their asset before a storm or before an incident, and then can take the after imagery to compare the before and after, makes it a lot quicker for FEMA to justify cost reimbursement when those claims come in. We talk about debris management. Here in Florida, when a hurricane comes through, there's so much debris that gets, you know, from down trees and tree limbs and whatever else. It's got to get scooped up and taken to these transfer sites. And you'll see pictures of that in a second, where it's basically chopped down into mulch and then hauled off to another site. And it's very difficult to manage how much debris is coming in and out. And people are wondering, especially in affluent areas, why hasn't this debris been picked up out of my driveway? It's been a week. Well, drones are kind of helping to tell that story now by doing volumetric calculations on the pile and message strategies to help support why it might be a delay in getting some of this debris moved. And beach erosion, you'll see an example of how we worked with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to document some beach erosion after Hurricane Irma came through. So this was an example of power restoration after Hurricane Irma. I think this was the first night mission flown for Florida Power and Light that ever in their history with drones. And this imagery, when it started coming in, it basically just helped tell a whole different story. Because historically for hurricanes, you know, FPL had ground photographers and ground videographers pointing up and looking at the guys in the buckets. Now they've got drones pointing down, and it just told a whole different story. And they were really excited about that. And we were able to do some cool things. I got video of a crew actually reactivating the circuit, and then all the lights coming back on in the neighborhood from an aerial perspective. And it reinforced the message strategy that FPL crews are on the job, we're restoring power, be patient, we're coming to your neighborhood soon. And that was very important for them at the time. I mentioned the debris management. This is a pretty good example of that. This is Coral Gables. You can see just, you know, this is just one corner of one of the transfer sites, but they've got these trucks coming in and out all day long. And you see that big red saucer looking thing in the top middle, that's a grinder where they basically lift the debris in there and it grinds it down into smaller pieces. We were able to conduct some volumetric calculations of the pile every day using drones and photogrammetry. Beach erosion, this was that shot of the Army Corps of Engineers project in Miami Beach. They just spent about 15 million in 2 to 3 weeks trucking sand from Lake Okeechobee to re-nourish the beach so all the tourists could come and have a good time. And Hurricane Irma came through and took some of that away. And we tracked the before the storm and the after here and sent it to the project manager for the Army Corps. I think I ruined her day when I sent her the information, but she was glad to have it. And it just kind of shows, again, another use case for what we can do with these systems. And you probably heard about Hurricane Dorian and what it did to the Bahamas. This is the area called the Flats in Marsh Harbor in Great Abaco. You can really see the damage from the aerial perspective of when the storm surge came in, and even the wind damage. But what was really cool here is we had some new software from a company called Pix4D, and the software was called React. And it was the first time we field tested the software, and it was a rapid mapping software. So when we went to the Bahamas, there was no mobile networks, no power, no connectivity. We had what we brought in on our backpack, which was a drone, a small laptop, some batteries, and some supplies and first aid kits and things. But we were actually able to test the Pix4D React software, and that's what this is. This is that same shot you just saw, but now a two-dimensional orthomosaic model that can be used to give to search teams to help search through and establish a grid search process. So it was the first time that it had ever been used in a real life scenario, and we were pretty excited about that. We're now seeing FEMA and the USAR teams take a hard look at that, and even at the Surfside building collapse earlier this summer, that software was being used. So I mentioned that there were some limitations with UAS, and you guys are going to know this, but if you think back, operating drones today is really kind of equivalent to using America Online back in 1996, for those of you who were around then, to access the internet. And what I mean by that is it's nothing like it's going to be in another 5 to 10 years. Broadband and persistent connectivity changed how the internet gets used, and the same thing's going to happen with UAS. So the radio controlled flight operations, visual line of sight requirement, ground station, that's all going to change as we get into whether it's 5G networks, satellite, BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight. It's good. It's going to evolve dramatically, and it's going to change how we operate and the types of operations that we conduct. And okay, this isn't shifting. Hang on a second. There we go. Just took a minute. So this is us doing a power restoration mission after Hurricane Irma, and you get a sense for how cumbersome this is. We've got the pilot in command, who's Tom in the black shirt and the hard hat. You've got a visual observer, Andy, in the safety vest. You've got Nate there, who's kind of designed to keep away any what we call looky-loos when people come out and want to start asking questions and asking about the drone. Nate's job is to kind of shepherd them away from the pilot to maintain that sterile cockpit environment. But you can see how cumbersome that is. That's all going to change, we expect, as the technology, the regulatory environment, and the capabilities in the sensors just continue to improve. So other factors kind of hamper the programs right now. Part 107 is still the benchmark, but there's a lack of standardized training and certification, especially in public safety. They've got standards for everything, but UAS just has not gotten there yet. Also establishing a culture of aviation safety and risk management, which is really important, but for public safety agencies that don't have that historical program or haven't had to really focus on aviation, it's new, and it can be difficult to get that instilled into their culture. Also, trust levels between remote pilots and manned aircraft pilots, very difficult to establish. Obviously, the manned aircraft pilots, their lives are on the line, their butts are in the seats, and they want to know that the guys flying the sticks down on the ground are not going to do something stupid and dangerous that risk their lives. So that's a trust building exercise that takes a little bit of time. There's obviously cyber security concerns. There's some geopolitical sensitivities about technology made in China, for example. We've got Moore's Law, which is the technical capability increasing as costs decrease and current tech becomes quickly outdated. There's privacy, civil liberty concerns by watchdog groups. There's just a lot of factors that are kind of inhibiting the rapid growth of UAS right now in the public safety field. This data is a little bit old because we just released our newest survey about 2 weeks ago in Atlanta at AUVSI Exponential. But it basically shows that public safety UAS programs are still pretty small. There's less than 10 total pilots for most programs. 73% have less than 10 on their roster. And monthly missions, most public safety agencies are only flying 10 missions per month. So if you do the math, 10 or less pilots per agency with 10 missions per month, that's an average of roughly 1 mission per month per agency, or 12 missions per year. Is that enough to be proficient? Probably not. So some work needs to be done there. Again, it's talking about standards and training to maintain proficiency. Also, the funding. We think public safety agencies have a lot of money. Some do, some don't. But by and large, most agencies have not figured out how to fund their UAS program. So 90% of those programs are relying on some form of grant funding or donation to really make their programs work. Also, the annual budgets for most of those agencies are less than $10,000. So if you think about, how do you pay an officer's salary? How do you get new equipment? That's why the grants and the donations are so important. That's also why on the public safety side, we're seeing officers perform what's called collateral duty. So they might be the drone pilot, but they're also on the SWAT team who has to conduct a breach or when there's an active shooter. So who's going to fly the drone when that guy's got to be on the SWAT team? Well, we see fire crews coming in. So law enforcement and fire will fly for each other at certain incidents because of this landscape where there just isn't enough budget to have dedicated drone pilots right now on the public safety side. So all in all, that means about 75% of public safety drone programs, we wonder, are you really ready for daily operations? The answer is probably not. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there, especially to prepare them to properly respond to a disaster, because they're just not built to withstand public scrutiny if things go sour and there's a mishap. The good news is that state and local governments are embracing drones. 92% say they will have a significant impact on their agenda over the next couple of years. And we see that here in Miami Beach. I mentioned SWAT. Well, this was an example of an active shooter exercise where they were using drones to help manage the SWAT resources as they stacked up. And again, exercises are a great way to demonstrate the value of these systems to key leadership, chiefs, elected officials, so they can actually see the power in a training environment without lives actually being on the line. So public safety drone programs are growing. The number of remote pilots and missions per month are increasing. Mission types are expanding. Program tenure is increasing. And drone programs are becoming the next big thing for most public safety agencies. This was that same exercise in Miami Beach. Here we've got a Las Ramblas incident where the drivers drove down pedestrians, simulating that, and drones performing command and control activities when fire rescue was working the scene. So what are the benefits for incident management? Well, they're local aviation resources for all jurisdictions, easy to deploy and transport. They're very cost efficient compared to manned aviation, especially. You can carry a variety of payload sensors for assorted mission types. Those are just increasing and improving. You get a rapid turnaround of imagery and data. You can either live stream immediately, or you can get the data off the aircraft as soon as it lands and start processing it and not have to wait for the airplane to land and taxi and all those kinds of things. By and large, drones are environmentally friendly. They are COVID-19 social distancing compliant, which has been a big benefit over the last year. I mentioned the FIU pedestrian bridge collapse. This was a night shot. We had worked with FHP and various agencies mapping this scene, National Transportation Safety Board, FIU Emergency Management, but it really, again, started showing the power of what the aerial mapping and forensic capabilities are of these systems for these types of accidents. So impacts on emergency management. We talked about training and exercises. It's definitely evolving those. We're seeing tabletop presentations and preparedness and response scenarios where they're game planning how to use drones in a tabletop environment before they actually go live in the field. We're seeing live drills with specialized resources. Good example of this is hazmat. They might drill a leaking container or a train derailment, how they're going to use UAS to respond to those incidents, and full-scale exercises with multi-stakeholder coordination. There's also planned predicted incidents, which are like special events, hurricanes, events you know are probably going to happen, where you can pre-position the UAS resources for immediate response. And then there's the unplanned incidents, fires, tornadoes, earthquakes, where you've got to swiftly mobilize UAS and get them in the areas where you need them. Some other impacts: aerial situational awareness is now within reach of emergency managers at every level for every type of incident. You now have air resources. Number 5, FEMA is starting to typecast these. If you know how FEMA works, everything that FEMA uses is called a resource. So a USAR team, an urban search and rescue team, is a resource. There's different types of teams. If you need a bulldozer, that is typecast as a resource. If you need a dump truck, that is typecast as a resource. You might need a 2-ton or a 4-ton. How much can you haul with a dump truck? Everything has its own typing. The UAS typing is new. It's not perfected, but they're working on it. And that is starting to impact emergency management. So if you think about, if you're an emergency manager, you call for a drone team, what are you really getting? Is it somebody with a DJI Phantom and 3 batteries? Or is it somebody with a DJI Matrice 300, a variety of sensors with 25 batteries? Big difference there as far as flight time and capability. So that's where FEMA's got some work to do. Also, number 6, emergency drone services contracts. Most municipalities have contracts in place to bring in, for example, for debris removal. They don't own all those dump trucks. They'll have contractors come in with a fleet of dump trucks and start hauling out the debris. We recommend the same thing on the drone side. You might have a drone person, or a community might have a small team who operates drones, but again, with collateral duty, those people are probably not going to be available in a major incident. You're going to need support. And the emergency drone service contracts are something that we recommend those communities have. Aerial rapid damage assessments. We did some work in Hurricane Michael with Florida Task Force 1, showing the power of this for rapid damage assessment. What FEMA does is it sends out its search teams to conduct what's called windshield surveys, and they will drive around the different rural areas and mark up, okay, this home's okay, we check this address. Well, sometimes you've got trees in the road, or people haven't cleared the trees in their driveway, so the search teams couldn't get up, and it would take them hours potentially to go through a small neighborhood if there was a lot of trees and timber in the way. Well, we demonstrate how we could launch a drone and basically conduct that same survey in about 5 to 10 minutes and save them 50 minutes or more, and they were very happy about that. So we recovery, again, I mentioned the debris management, not going to dwell on that too much. Number 8, airspace authorization and operational waivers. Key for emergency managers to learn how to coordinate with FAA air traffic control and the systems operations security group up in Washington, DC. They've got to know how to get COAs, how to work LANCs, how to request a TFR or operate within a TFR if there's one in their areas, and again, request those SGIs. Number 9, drones and 5G networks are going to start offering dynamic situational reports. There's going to be constant data and the information flow, which is going to, if you're an emergency manager, you know what the planning P is, but it's the planning cycle for an incident response. And that persistent connectivity with UAS is really going to be a game changer for that. But that leads to some problems, like number 10, data storage and archiving. Who's going to do it? What, where, how, when, how? Police and law enforcement agencies typically are pretty good with that, because they have to manage evidence as it is through the chain of custody. On the emergency management fire rescue side, they historically haven't had to do that. But with public records and FOIA requests, is now we're getting journalists and other interested parties requesting access to drone imagery that might be taken at an incident. So public safety agencies need to understand and have a plan for how they're going to manage and produce that data. Also, concerns surrounding privacy and cybersecurity. That's a really big one. What imagery can be used and retained? How do you provide operational security for aircraft and counter UAS? These are all really big issues that are being tackled right now. And it's number 12, it's forcing emergency managers to reevaluate the traditional structure of the air operations branch within the incident command system. You may be familiar with ICS. Probably not. It's a model that's used by emergency managers to help manage incidents of all types, from very small to national significance. And drones are starting to impact and raise some key questions as far as, is it a traditional aviation resource, or is a small drone just a tool that an urban search and rescue team might deploy to go check a house or a neighborhood? Argument is it's a little bit of both, but they're trying to figure out where to really categorize that. And as we look to the future, number 13, it's what I call UAS 2.0. It's really when we start transporting cargo using drone swarms and advanced AI technology. It's really going to change the way we respond to a wide variety of incidents, disaster relief, mass casualty, you name it. So the big questions for most agencies: do you own or rent? Do you build your own program or do you contract it out? And there's no right answer. What we see a lot of agencies do is they'll kind of start like they're going to do it in-house, then they realize that the level of expertise they need might be more than they have, and then they'll contract out for different assistance or support with the drone services provider. Who's going to foot the bill? We saw that the budgets aren't really big right now for public safety, so they need to really look at what size budget they're going to have and where they're getting the money from. And grant writing is key in this area. And what is the end game? And this is probably one of the most important points, is if you're starting a UAS program or you're going to use UAS for public safety disaster response missions, you need to have a plan for what you're going to do with the imagery. You need to establish the workflow, include your GIS folks and end users of aerial data products in the discussion. Don't just start a drone program and say, okay, we're going to go collect all this imagery, and then not have a plan for what you're going to do with it. One of our early customers with thousands of cellular tower companies around the world told me early on, he said, Chris, I don't want to get 800 photos of a cell tower. I just want a report showing me where the problems are and what we need to fix. And so we've got to use that kind of thought process, I think, in everything we do with UAS. Is, we might really like the cool, sexy photos we're taking, but at the end of the day, most people don't want a bunch of photos. They want operational intelligence that helps them solve problems. So starting the UAS program, some other tips: find a champion, engage the community early. You've got to be upfront and transparent about how and why you want to use drones. Identify the other stakeholders, community groups, privacy groups, ACLU. Get them involved in the conversation. They might not agree with your perspective, but giving them a seat at the table in the discussion is really important because it builds trust. So they might not agree with you, but the fact that you invited them into the conversation, they will likely trust you, and you got to have that transparency. And demonstrate the tech to news media, local schools, STEM projects. I tell police departments, you used to take your K9 units out to the schools. Well, now you can do it with your UAS program. Take your drones out, demonstrate it to the schools, and get the kids excited about it. That's going to help break down these barriers and garner public positive acceptance of the technology. You've got to establish realistic goals and a good timeline for success. A pilot test is something we recommend for many communities who are just embarking on a new drone program, and learn from the other agencies using drones. We've now seen the data shows that there's so many programs out there with 3 or more years of experience conducting public safety drone operations. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Others have already been there and done that. And again, Drone Responders is a great resource to go and learn from other agencies using drones for good. So how do we train remote pilots? It's probably a little bit different than Embry-Riddle, but just some of the keys we tell the folks we work with is select personnel with a passion for tech or aviation. There's a term in public safety called voluntold, where your chief or your leader is basically telling you you're going to do something. If you do that with a drone program, it's probably not going to be that successful, because if the person's not passionate about it, they're going to do a half-hearted attempt at making it successful. Number 2, Part 107 is really the starting point. It's kind of like if you get your Coast Guard captain's license or a Florida real estate license, doesn't mean you're a great captain, doesn't mean you're a good realtor. Part 107 doesn't mean you're a good drone pilot. It's just the starting point. You've got to really build the skills and the knowledge to really become proficient over the long term. Number 3, create a culture of aviation safety and risk management. Have total accountability. Leadership might need to modify their agency culture to be able to transform itself into a culture of aviation safety. And number 4, train pilots, build a program based on ASTM UAS standards with compliance validation by drone responders, which is something that Drone Responders does offer. We do host a variety of conferences and events with AIRT. Commercial UAV Expo Americas, that's an old logo, but we will be in Las Vegas this year from September 7th through the 9th at the Drone Responders Summit. As I mentioned, we just finished Exponential. I will be at the Energy, Drone, and Robotics Summit in Houston, Texas on, I believe it's October 25th, Monday. So if you're interested in kind of really seeing how drones operate on the public safety emergency management side, these are all really good events to come out to, and we'll get into a little bit more depth on the use cases, the tactical operations, and the program management surrounding these systems. So coordinating UAS assets, we recommend agencies establish contact with nearby jurisdictions through their mutual assistance agreements, and make sure they train, drill, and exercise the use cases to help build goodwill and trust. And if possible, get the manned aviators in there as well. We tell folks, accept unglamorous missions to prove your ROI. Everybody wants to go out there and rescue the baby and save the barricaded hostage, but those types of missions are really few and far between. And go out there and conduct public information missions to really build the trust and get the word out that your organization is using these systems for the greater good of the community. And we do have a program through AIRT and drone responders. It's not the FEMA IRIS, that is actually an old one, but we have a new one right there, remotepilots.org. It's basically a directory of drone pilots around the world. If you are willing to basically go out, if there's a disaster in your area, a flood, a tornado, a fire, you lost child in the woods, and you're willing to help, we're asking folks to go to remotepilots.org and register. And through our partnership with ESRI, we are geo-referencing all those flight teams around the world to be able to create a master directory of people who can help in emergencies and disasters. So key takeaways, small drones are going to fill the air gap for type 4 and 5 incidents. They can be used for every incident type. Number 2, aerial imagery from drones will provide substantial ROI when properly matched with an appropriate mission. Got to match the capability with the mission. Number 3, drones represent an emerging technology that still has substantial limitations, again, similar to AOL dial-up internet service in the 1990s. Number 4, most public safety drone programs are a work in progress. And number 5, drones are making significant impacts on emergency management. These impacts are going to increase while also becoming more dramatic and pronounced as the technology evolves. 6, local public safety drone teams should be able to handle most incidents, most cases. But number 7, for larger incidents, establish emergency contracts with experienced drone service providers. Would you buy a fleet of dump trucks, or would you contract it out? Number 8, the MVPs are really the data managers, the GIS specialists, the AV techs. Remote pilots are increasingly becoming an expanding commodity, and automation and autonomous systems are just going to amplify that, I think. Number 9, when building a SUAS program, you got to crawl before you can walk, establish a culture of aviation safety and risk management within your organization. And finally, AIRT and drone responders are working to support small unmanned aircraft systems use by public safety and emergency service organizations across the US. So if you have questions, or you're interested in more information on how you can get involved with AIRT, feel free to reach out to me, ctodd@airt.ngo. And we definitely look for volunteer help, not just with operating aircraft, but with management, with managing volunteers, marketing, promotions, all the way across the board. And Brent, let me turn it back over to you. Looks like we've got about 12 minutes left.
Outstanding, Chris. That was so comprehensive and detailed. I really appreciate it, and on behalf of our students, I am positive that they really appreciate all the wealth of knowledge you just shared with them. To reiterate, you had a statement on there at the end, crawl, walk, run. I mean, that is our philosophy, especially with our SUAS operations training. It's been a work in progress since before Part 107, but when Part 107 came out, we had at least a measured process, and we recognized, hey, this is just the start of it. This is, you pass a paper test, and now you've only just now left the gate. There is so much that still needs to be done as far as knowledge, skill, and ability development, hand-eye coordination, everything that goes into understanding how to properly utilize the tools, as well as maintaining that professionalism and that safety culture within aviation. One of the cool things that I'd like to share that we've got coming out, we in our SUAS ops, we utilize simulation. So we'll have tools like Real Flight X. I have the controller here. We utilize that to practice and train and get introduced to a variety of platforms. After you've demonstrated proficiency at that level, you then move on to operation of an actual multi-rotor. And then you step up to larger scale operations as part of a cohort where you come together physically. We now have a new technology that we just got approved BV loss waiver capability under the FAA called remote split ops, RSO. RSO in and of itself, it's not a new idea, but within small UAS flight training, it's a new application. Essentially, we can have one of our faculty who are located out in, say, Texas in a rural setting. They could have a larger platform that they take off and then turn command over to a remote pilot while they maintain situational awareness and visual line of sight to it. They maintain oversight and can reassume or reacquire control at any point. The end goal is to help shepherd and guide the students' experience with that platform, building hours, building understanding, and hopefully increasing their overall exposure to a variety of platforms as we grow this. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool.
So I've got a few questions, and then I'll turn it over to the class, but just some of the things that you see in field, what are some of the more recent technological advances or breakthroughs that you find exciting? What is it that are happening right now that you see, wow, that's going to really help us do what we're setting out to do?
I think the VTOL, it really represents an element that is needed in public safety. I mean, the quadcopters, the DJI drones are great, but when you really want to cover larger areas for things like damage assessment, they're not quite as effective. So it's a question of getting the right sensor package, the right batteries to give you the flight time. Excuse me. So we're seeing some good progress there. I think, I mentioned batteries. We're seeing them increase slightly. We'd like to see some more development there to extend the flight range. I think the sensors are becoming a lot more interesting. One of the things at Exponential, there's an institute in Germany that's been doing research with an acoustic sensor that's got various microphones that can detect human screams in a disaster situation. So I think that acoustic capability is really interesting because we've been so focused on visual and thermal and infrared, but we kind of forget the auditory because we just kind of thought, well, you've got the drone motors, you probably can't hear much. And here they've figured out a way to actually cut through that clutter and pick up some different nuanced sounds. So that's pretty exciting too. So it's overarching all of that is, I think we kind of want to see the US get back into the game a little bit. China has really dominated the small UAS space over the last 5 years. And, we're starting to see companies like Skydio and maybe FLIR, maybe AeroVironment make some moves. And I think that's needed because competition's good. It's just going to lift the entire industry to have more people competing at an even playing field.
Excellent. As a professional in this field, what tools or resources do you use to stay informed? And what are some of the challenges that you find of sifting through all the vast amount of material that's available?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I subscribe to a ton of newsletters. The newsletters are really typically filled with press releases and news releases touting new products. And so, you've got to take those with a grain of salt. Maybe there's some value there, maybe not. I've been to a lot of demos where, unfortunately, most of the demos don't go as they should. The technology has just been a little bit too raw or unproven, or they didn't have the demonstration set up properly. So I think, we are very fortunate with AIRT and with drone responders. We have this vast network of public safety people as well as industry people who are reaching out to us. So we're constantly able to validate claims and get real practical experience and anecdotal information from public safety agencies who are using the systems. And I think that, really helps us kind of cut through some of that clutter and BS, for lack of a better word, to see what's really working in the field. And so I think, the message there is you've got to do due diligence. Don't take everything with a grain of salt. Don't get wooed by the marketing material, and ask for references, testimonials, and do your own research.
Excellent. Well, that being said, I'd like to open it up to any of the students that might have some questions. Consider this week, we were reaching out to local commercial operators. Think kind of that strategy of what you might be able to kind of translate that into questions for Chris.
All right. Who's got a question? Esteban.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
Doing you?
Very good, thank you.
My question is, who or what is taking the data your team is collecting and turning it into useful information? I found very particular that example that you gave about not taking 800 pictures of a cell tower, just saying this is the problem. And I wonder who does that.
Yeah, so in some cases it's the pilot. In other cases, we use the data manager. On the airborne response side, we've got various contracts. We work with Motorola Solutions to do aerial tower inspections of their radio assets. We use some proprietary software there, developed in concert with Pix4D, that allows us to really categorize and the different equipment on the tower, and it turns it into an asset management suite. So we'll upload the data into that suite, and then the magic algorithm kind of works its magic and sorts through the photos and turns it into a 3D model, as well as some AI capabilities that looks at the equipment and catalogs it. For example, with Florida Power and Light, it depends on what the mission is. Sometimes they just want raw photos. Sometimes they want video for marketing and communications. With Citizens Insurance, they're looking specifically for photos that we then upload into their system, and they're basically taking it and owning it and doing what they do with it. So every client's been a little bit different. And it's really about establishing the workflow for a given mission. Some partners don't know or don't have the capability to manage the data. Others have a very defined and prescribed workflow process that we just need to go out and collect the images and integrate into. So it hasn't been a one size fits all format yet that we've seen.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
You bet. Any other questions out there?
Yes, I got a question. This is Ed Buenaflor. I know the name on there is not my daughter's name. I don't know why. But my question is, you mentioned a lot of challenges for small UAS operations, and there's still challenges today, even though drones have been around for, as you mentioned, about 100 years, but these challenges seem to still be in place. My question is about the large drone industry. Where do you foresee the regulations changing in the future, like it did for the small UAS community? Where do you see the large drone regulations changing here in the future?
That's a great question. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I think it starts with beyond visual line of sight. I sit on the ARC as an alternate member under drone responders for Chief Warner. So I've been privy to some of those conversations. And you've got some of the larger companies and manufacturers eyeing to how do we get to the types of operations of hauling cargo and larger aircraft. So it starts with BVLOS, then it gets into type certification and how that's going to get managed. And by the FAA's own admission, they're working with an industry that moves at the pace of Silicon Valley, but they're kind of stuck moving at the pace of Washington, D.C. Now, they've been doing a pretty good job, I think, at trying to pick up the pace. If you think about the U.S. air fleet, within the first 2 years of drone registrations. I think we saw a 10-fold increase or more of the US registered air fleet, and the FAA just didn't have the capability for that. So everything that's going to be done, I think, from the regulatory perspective is going to be predicated on safety. And there's a lot of challenges and a lot of issues that need to be figured out. But I think BVLOS and aircraft certification are going to be two of those roles. And then the third is going to be infrastructure. I mean, we hear a lot about urban air mobility and advanced air mobility. You know, I think a lot of that's kind of a pipe dream, not indefinitely, but it's going to be almost a decade till I think we're really seeing those operations become cost effective and viable. You're going to need to look at, you know, how you are we going to be restructuring and redesigning rooftops of skyscrapers and to be able to accommodate these vehicles landing up there. I mean, there's just a lot of pieces that need to be put into place. So there's not an easy answer to that question. And it really becomes operational, I think, specific based on the type of operation you're looking to run.
Yeah, let's just hope it's not another 100 years.
I am with you there, brother. Yep, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Ed. Anyone else? Going once?
All right. Well,
Okay.
excellent, everyone. I really appreciate it. If you know, by tonight or tomorrow, if you can go into the discussion forum, just post a reply to my announcement about this, indicating you were here, and just maybe give a 1 or 2 sentence synopsis of some of your big takeaways. We want to, I think, really encourage our fellow classmates to consider trying to come to these, because I think they're very beneficial. To Chris, I really want to say thank you so much for being here and talking to us. Kind of cool tie-in. One of our partners, one of the upcoming board members of AUVSI is going to be our next guest in 2 weeks. Eric Schwartz from FPL Air is going to be joining us. So he's going to be your number 2, I believe, vice president of our Peninsula chapter.
And Ed, make sure you ask that question you asked me to Eric, because he's going to have an expanded answer for you.
Copy that. I'll do that.
All right. Well, thank you all. It was great being here. And Brent, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I'll catch up with you in our discussion and within the classroom. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to fire me off an email. If you want to chat about any of this, just individually, we'll set up a meeting. I'm happy to really facilitate and talk to you guys. So have a great night.
Thank you both.
Thanks, everyone.